Right now, Sharon Harris, I'm going to bring you on. Matt, thanks for joining us.
Hello, everybody.
All right, we've got our first question coming in from Sharon. Oh, maybe not.
Is it Sharon, you said, Chris?
Yeah, it looks like she jumped off the moderation panel. We've got quite the band of Westland fans in here. We've got Iceland, we've got Los Angeles. Let's see, where else do we have everyone else from? It looks like we've got quite the mix. That's pretty great. Okay, Matt, we've got a question here that's come in through the chat from Nick Moyle. Thanks for the tour. How does working with the Gary oak compare to other oak species?
Oh man, there's a lot of big differences. The first big thing is that Gary oak isn't it's not grown commercially the same way that you see Quercus alba, the American white oak, grown, or Quercus robur or Petrea. It grows basically wild, which is it's trees. So you'd think that all trees grow wild, but what I mean by that is when the oak habitat, the natural oak habitat here in the Northwest, is what they call a savanna. It's not a forest, it's a savanna. So these trees have a lot of space to kind of grow and grow wide, throwing out these big branches. And basically, as soon as that happens, that is essentially a knot in the tree, which makes the wood essentially very difficult to work with. In fact, any knot that changes the ability for it to hold liquid makes it unusable for us to use in staves. So a lot of the material that we get for Gary oak, you have to sort out, what might come down in a tree, because you don't really get to pick what tree you get, because we can't really cut these trees down. They're protected, and as they should be. You have to take whatever you can get. It might be a 300-year-old tree, but you might only be able to get 1 barrel's worth of wood out of it because the rest just wouldn't hold liquid. So that's the first big step, is being able to sort through that and making sure that you can use that wood. The second big thing is to try to air dry the wood. The thing that's really important to know about Garyana is that it's phenolic. That's its main kind of flavor characteristic. So if you think about the American white oak, the Quercus alba, that's got a lot of caramel and vanilla notes. French oak is kind of spicy. The Quercus Garyana it's like dark, spicy molasses, smoky, which is a really interesting flavor profile. But that's linked to tannins, and those flavors are essentially unlocked by the breakdown of tannins. So we actually have a 3-year minimum air drying process, longest, as far as I know, longest air drying process for any oak in the world, to break down the tannins in the wood to kind of unlock these flavor profiles, flavor notes, and make them available to us, but also softening the palate. And we have to start that process. It's not an easy thing to do. There's nobody, you can't just call up, 1-800 Garyana oak and get this oak species. We're buying logs as they come down. If, when a log comes down in a windstorm or something, we're buying those logs, cutting it, drying it ourselves, and then it's made into barrels 3 years later. So you take all that. It's also more brittle than Quercus alba, so you got to be careful with that. It doesn't bend quite as easily, so you get more splitting and stuff like that. But the end result is worth it. I mean, the flavor profile is amazing, and it's something we continue to learn more about every year, and we continue to make improvements on and being more efficient with the Gary oak.
Now we've got a couple of questions that have come in. First one here is coming from Berger Sirgensson out of Iceland, my study buddy at Harriet Watt. He's got a question. He's asking, how did you determine and how did you settle on the 5 different malts that we're using currently for our house profile?
Yeah, great question. So we actually did 20 different prototypes in the very early days of Westland, which is about 10 years ago now. And the idea of roasted and kiln malts was super obvious at the beginning. As I said before, that during the tour, the big influence from the brewing industry was massive. But what we wanted to do was, it's kind of funny to think, like, at the time, and in fact, many distilleries still say that barley doesn't contribute flavor to whiskey, but it was so obvious that it did that we actually were more concerned about making sure that it didn't become like a parlor trick, if that makes sense. It was very easy to get, for example, a lot of chocolate flavor in the whiskey. We use a type of malted barley called pale chocolate malt. And that pale chocolate malt, we only use it 4% of the grain bill because we were very determined to not have it be a one-note whiskey. We wanted a spectrum of malt flavor. So we ended up settling on this kind of 70% pale malt, 10% Munich malt, 12% what we call extra special malt. It's only made by one malting company in the world. 4% pale chocolate, 4% brown malt. Because all of those flavor notes, all those malts together contributed different types of malty flavor notes. But they never kind of overpowered each other. They all added to a whole. And that was really what we were looking for, is to showcase what malted barley was capable of.
Okay, we got another good one coming in from Louis Gow. He's asking, anyone that he's spoken to in the UK knows the Westland and have loved the liquid, especially our peated. How would you say the brand has been received in the US, which is so dominated by sweeter bourbon styles?
Well, that's a great question. Well, thank you for the compliments. That's really nice. It's funny. In the US, it's almost, bourbon is the big looming thing in the US. Everybody in the US is still so infatuated with bourbon, and you can understand why. And Americans tend to have a sweeter palate than they would like to admit. They always say they don't like sweet things as much, but it's definitely true. The thing for us is that we have some of that characteristic of traditional American whiskeys like bourbons. With New American Oak, you're able to have some of that flavor profile that comes through that is familiar. So when you have our American Oak expression, if you're familiar with the New American Oak flavor profile notes of caramel, vanilla, that's a nice entryway in there. But as soon as you taste it, it's obvious that it's not bourbon. It's not trying to do the same thing as bourbon. We tend to bring people in actually from both parts of the industry, bringing people in that are single malt heads, but also we bring in a lot of American whiskey fans, especially into the products that utilize New American Oak. So we try to strike a nice balance there. We didn't do that just to appeal to bourbon fans, but we're an American single malt distillery. We want to use Quercus alba, the American white oak. It just happens that a lot of people within the U.S. like that oak, and we're happy to make whiskey that utilizes that white oak effectively. That's very important because we're not trying to make the white oak be everything. Be careful what I say here. One of my criticisms of the bourbon industry is that it tends to be so dominant and focused on oak. If you read bourbon tasting notes, a lot of those tasting notes are just the tasting notes of Quercus alba, of the American white oak. How many times have you read a tasting note of bourbon that says it's got lots of caramel and vanilla? Well, yeah, no kidding. So the big thing for us is to take that flavor profile, but to match it, in fact, with the flavor profile that comes from our malted barley. And we're very, very keen on making sure that the oak does not overpower the flavor of the malt. We want that to be a balance of flavor and for those to complement each other.
That's great, Matt. Okay, we've got a really good one here. Prepare yourself, Matt.
Oh, God.
So Eric House, member of the Malt Imposters, certainly a house favorite of the Westland team. We love their reviews. He's asking, hey kids, how goes the battle to get American Single Malt recognized as a quote unquote thing with the TTB?
Well, the TTB's thing department is going pretty slow these days, but no, so for people who aren't familiar, one of the things that's a unique challenge for us at Westland is that American Single Malt whiskey isn't an official category yet. And we were the first people, as far as we know, we were the first distillery to put American Single Malt whiskey on a label, but those words don't mean anything in the same way that bourbon does or Scotch whiskey does. So we created a definition and we gathered together a number of other producers, and we came up with something called the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission, wrote what we call a standard of identity, a definition for American Single Malt that was submitted to the TTB, which is in the US is our governing agency for label enforcement. And there's more than 160 other distilleries making single malt in the US that have signed up and are part of this. So that was submitted about a year ago. Things are slow. To be fair, things are a bit chaotic in the US government. world recently, as everybody I'm sure knows. So with election season looming, a lot of that stuff is kind of on the back burner, I think, from the TTB. But when we submitted to the TTB, we got super favorable response back, because fundamentally what we wanted to do was say, when people buy a bottle of American Single Malt whiskey, it should be what they see on the label, you know? And I think a lot of people have seen this in the Japanese whiskey industry. There's been a lot of, whiskey brought in from other places from around the world and then bottled in Japan and sold as Japanese whiskey. On the flip side, you have, the Scotch Whisky Association is sometimes seen as being too restrictive. So we wanted to create something that was kind of in between there, so that people could buy an American Single Malt. They would know that it was, one, it was made in America, mash, distilled, matured in America. Two, it was single distillery, single malt, single distillery, just like the definition in Scotland, 100% malted barley, so that, you would know what you were buying, but without the same kind of cultural restrictions that the SWA presents. So we've got a lot of, because that's basically about protecting the consumer, now understands exactly what they're buying. That was received really favorably by the TTB. So we think it's kind of only a matter of time. Maybe, by the end of this year, or a few months into next year, the TTB had taken all these proposals and they're reviewing them one by one. There was hundreds of different proposals, so they got a lot of work to do. But so far so good.
All right, Matt, I have to stand up. We have an editorial correction on my behalf because I messed up because I've got morning brain and not enough coffee in me right now. But Aaron Krause is from boozdancing.com, a fantastic website that we also really love, but that's my mistake. We also have another question coming through from Nick Moyle. He's asking, what can we expect from Garonne 5.1? And I'm going to edit his question slightly, which is, when does Garonne 5.1 come out in the UK market? Actually,
Chris, you'll know when it comes out in the UK market better than I will.
November 7th.
Okay, there we go. Just making sure. It's hard to time a global release of Garonne, the next Garonne. So we're super excited about Garonne 5. It is, Garonne 4 got a lot of really positive press. It was named one of the top 100 spirits in the world with the Ultimate Spirits Challenge. We've got a lot of really positive momentum going. People are really liking what we're doing with it, the exploration of Gary Oak. This year's edition is all kind of focused on that phenolic nature, right? So I was talking before about how Gary Oak has these really phenolic flavor notes that are kind of the defining feature of it as a species. So we said, okay, what if we take that phenolic nature of Gary Oak and we pair it with something else that's phenolic? Because each edition of Garonne is about an exploration of Gary Oak in our house style. So for us, that was peated malt, of course. The other thing that is famous for being phenolic is peat. So we put heavily peated spirit, 55 part per million phenolic content, into Gary Oak casks in a blend with some other, we call pale malt, so just non-peated malt in bourbon casks for some balance. But basically the dominant flavor notes there are these two sources of phenolic notes coming together. And it's not, it's peated, but it's very clear that it is not like a typical peated whiskey, because the phenolic notes that Garonne Oak provides is very different. It's savory. It's more, we always say it's like Kansas City style barbecue sauce, which if you're in the UK, maybe you have no idea what that means, but the general idea is that it's like kind of sweet molasses, dark spice and clove, things like that. And a little bit, as I said, a little bit savory, like barbecue. So you have these two things kind of coming together and competing. We're super excited about it. It's a really great whiskey, super proud of it. So it'll be very different from the last edition of Garonne, as all editions of Garonne are very different from each other, because we're exploring things. And if you're new to Garonne, the whole concept for us is that this as a species of oak has not been used in the world of whiskey before. We are learning things in real time. We are exploring this variety of oak. It's only native. It only grows in the Pacific Northwest. In fact, a really narrow range in the Pacific Northwest, but we're learning as we go. And, we're learning about how, for example, these phenolic flavor notes come together and work together. And we learn that, and then we release that worldwide. So it's a very much a whiskey that's kind of on the cutting edge, out on the edge of the unknown in whiskey. And for us, that's one of the most exciting things about the work that we do in general at Westland, which is that everything is about pushing forward, exploring Pacific Northwest provenance, but also realizing that we're not trying to play the history and tradition game. We're trying to play the what does the future look like game.
All right, Matt, we've got one that came in via WhatsApp, not in the chat, unfortunately, but the question is, can you talk a little bit about why Westland's chosen that Belgian Saison yeast versus potentially yeast strains with a higher level of fermentability?
Yeah, very simple. Flavor. You know, I don't care about yield. That'll probably make some finance people upset, but you know, the main thing for us is to make a good whiskey. You know, I mean, first and foremost, we should be in this business because we love delicious whiskey. And when we got into this business, we said there's so much potential in single malt that's not being tapped. And not that whiskey isn't good. I want to be very clear about that. There's everybody in this room will know that there's amazing whiskey out there. But there's also still so much that hasn't really been done before. And one of those things, again, you look at the craft brewing industry and you just go, wait a second, they've been using hundreds of different yeast strains. They were using different yeast strains before they even knew what yeast was. And that idea, having not transferred to the whiskey industry, was always super perplexing. So there's two parts to the Saison choice. One was kind of a philosophical statement. The Saison farmhouse ale yeast is basically the polar opposite of the M strain. It's as close to a wild yeast strain as you can get. It's very flavorful. It is slower. It yields less. But that kind of principle, I think, was very important. The other big thing was the flavor profile it generated, though. You know, it's one thing to say this principle is great and it produces a lot of flavor, but does it taste good, especially with the other parts of our house style? So because we were also focusing on this malt flavor, we wanted something that would pair really nicely with those roasted malts I was talking about earlier, with the chocolates and hazelnuts and pastry notes. So the kind of the cherry notes, the orange marmalade, all that stuff coming together produce a really nice balanced flavor profile. You balance that against the new American oak, and all of a sudden you've got these kind of three dimensions to the whiskey that are each kind of bigger than traditional whiskeys, but none of them are dominating. And that was really, really important. So we tested in those 20 different prototypes I was mentioning before. There were 12 or 15 different yeast strains that we did with all of that. So it was super exciting. The Saison yeast strain was our favorite. We've not deviated from that at all.
Another one just came in from Pete Lynch, asking about how the TTB's current legislative pace affected your thoughts towards playing outside the current class and type definitions. Does it make you hesitant or hopeful?
Great question. We are not going to play outside of the type and class definition because we are an American single malt whiskey distillery, full stop. Even if it gets rejected, which I don't think is going to happen, but even if it does, it's not going to change a thing about the way that we go about our business. We decided to focus ourselves on making one product and just trying to do that really, really well. A lot of distilleries have taken, I guess, what I would call the typical craft distillery approach, which is, make a bourbon, make a rye, make a rum, make a gin, make a vodka, all these things. And we said, we just want to focus on single malt whiskey that was evocative of the Pacific Northwest, both the stuff that grows here, but also the culture that exists here, and just do that one thing, make it very simple. So if we don't get when we started that business, there definitely wasn't a label definition. And even if there isn't one in the future, that doesn't really affect us too much. I'm hopeful. I also understand these things go slow and they go at their own pace. There's nothing we can do about it. But I'm excited about the category. The category of American single malt is growing really, really rapidly, especially in the States. As I said earlier, 160 distilleries producing some amount of single malt in this country, all producing stuff that is pretty different from the Scottish whiskey industry, which again is not an indictment of any problem with the Scottish whiskey industry, but it's just adding something new, right? Just adding something that's worthwhile and worth exploring. So I'm super hopeful about the category, whether we get the definition or not.
Matt, I'm about to bring on a guest that wants to ask you a question. Stand by. Oh, it looks like they've just left. Haynes, if you're still in the room, feel free to try to jump back in on the moderation panel. I'm not quite sure why it didn't allow you to.
It's all good. You can ask questions in the chat as well. So
yeah, whatever's comfortable, folks. And like I said, we've got Matt for another couple of minutes, and then we're going to have him. He's going to be jumping off, just starting the day up out in the Pacific Northwest. Matt, I'll ask a quick question. How are things going out in the Pacific Northwest right now with regards to the wildfires and things like that?
yeah, so we're people have seen the news. There's been a lot of fires here on the entire west coast of the U.S. Washington State, where Seattle is, has had some wildfires quite a bit. In fact, one of the biggest wildfire seasons we've ever had. It hasn't really compared, though, to what's happened in Oregon and California. That's been particularly bad this year. We've had a lot of smoke clouding the skies, but Oregon and California, those fires are much closer to the major cities there, and it's affected the wine industry a lot. The west coast of the United States is where most of the wine in the U.S. is made, so it's affected the wine industry quite a bit. So we're as far as I know, everybody that I am aware of or know is healthy, happy. A lot of people in the wine business are hurting, and smoke taint and vintages and stuff like that. But this has come to be something of a new reality. Actually, this is not, having grown up here, we did not have this. There was not wildfires like exist today. So this is something that is new. So this is something that everybody's trying to adapt to, and we're all doing our best.
All right, Matt, it looks like we've gotten all the questions in at this point. You want to give us some final thoughts from the co-founder and master distiller of Westland Distillery?
Oh man, no pressure. Well, I just want to say thanks to everybody who was able to tune in. Again, as I said in the video, we're super transparent. If you ever want to learn anything more about Westland, you don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'll be happy to share everything we can with you. We believe that there's something really exciting happening here in the Pacific Northwest as far as making whiskey. All the stuff we're doing with new barley varietals, with local peat, local oak. There's only 4 ingredients in single malt whiskey, and we're able to take those and create something that is fundamentally new. And that's the appeal, I think, for Westland. So I hope that everybody gets a chance to try Westland. If you're interested in Garonne Edition 5, it's always limited. So when it comes out, make sure you try to reserve that right away. But yeah, if anybody wants to learn more about Westland, we're here and we're available, and we'll be around. We'll be doing talks all week as well, through the weekend and into next week. So especially tune in the main stage. I think the main stage on Wednesday is going to be really exciting. So
let's actually do a little context to that really quickly, Matt. So tomorrow at 3 p.m., I'll be leading through Westland Distillery, A Brave New Tradition, which is a tasting kit that you can still purchase from the Whiskey Exchange. That's got our core range, American Oak Sherrywood and Peated, along with Garonne Edition 4, which we've just found out quite recently was named a top 100 spirit in the world by Ultimate Spirits Challenge, which is super exciting. And then on Sunday, Matt's got a really awesome session at 5 p.m. local time in Britain, which is Westland, Outpost at the Edge of the World. And he's going to go into a full discussion about our newly developed Outpost range, which includes the whiskeys Garonne and Calere, and a soon or future to be released peated expression as well that Matt sort of briefly mentioned in our tour. And then Matt, what do you have on the main stage? What day is that?
So that's on Wednesday. I believe I should probably double check that. But it's all about oak. So we're going to be doing a tasting. I think it's with, I want to say it's with Whistle Pig and with Chichibu. And it'll be a tasting and exploring of different oaks. So we'll taste our American Oak Expression and Garonne Edition 4 in that. So you'll be able to compare not just American Oak and Garonne, but Mizunara will be in the mix from Chichibu. So that'll be super exciting.
Thanks very much, Matt, for that. And everyone, when you get an opportunity, you can join into our exhibitor booth area. We're going to have a live playlist, a playlist with all of the content that we put together. We've got tons of great videos, lots of good info. And again, keep an eye out for our live sessions. We've got a lot of really great stuff to come. So thanks, everyone, for joining us today. And we're looking forward to seeing you all hopefully next year live at the Whiskey Exchange Show.
Great. Thanks, everybody.